Welcome back to Focus Today. Steve Johnson here with you, along with Meeke Addison. You've seen her on the Dove's Focus Today program. It's good to have you back here, Meeke. She's a director of the American Family Association's Urban Family Talk and just in touch with all things that you might find in the news. That's only a small task for you, but I know you're up for the challenge. It's good to have you here, Meeke. Thanks for being here.
It's great to be with you today. Thank you so much for having me, Steve.
You know, since last time you talked on Focus Today, there's been a lot going on in the news that concerns all the things that we've talked about in the past kind of coming together. Let's first back up a little bit and talk a little bit about the, I guess you'd call it a boycott against Target, but it kind of was less than a formalized one initially, it seemed, and kind of evolved into all of that. Explain why people have decided to take their shopping elsewhere than the Target department stores.
Well, we here at the American Family Association found it necessary to sort of help to rally the voices of concerned Americans all across this country. Once Target made it known that their policies were that a man or a woman could walk into their stores and simply by way of identification have access to not just restrooms, but the changing facility of their choice. And I want to make sure that people understand that. Again, we called for an official boycott of Target once our attempts to reach out to Target and say, hey, can you run this policy back? We believe that this policy is destructive and dangerous for the most vulnerable in our society, women and children. And Target refused. And so we went ahead with the boycott. And to date, it has garnered 1.2 million plus signatures of people who are pledging to take their money elsewhere because of the policy that a person based on their gender identity can have access to the changing facility or the restroom of their choice. Now, Steve, we have to understand exactly what is being said here. You take people out in a public place and you place them in the most vulnerable places they will be in. A restroom or a changing facility. Both of them, you necessarily have to understand that we are talking about your clothing have been removed. And now you are saying that a man who doesn't even have to look like a woman, he can simply say, today I am a woman, and he has access to a restroom or a changing facility. Now, there are people who would say, well, and what you could have is predators taking advantage of this. But actually what we do have are predators taking advantage of this. And in fact, predators were taking advantage of women and children in bathrooms and changing rooms before Target publicized this policy. It's dangerous and it's reckless.
And since that time that all of this has happened and you've gotten those signatures, the effect has been numerical. They've been able to actually tally what the effect has been on Target. What is the latest you've heard?
Well, I've heard $3 billion, and we understand the volatility of the stock market and how these things are, you know, they're up one day, down the next. But what we have seen is we've continued to see Target stocks, their shares losing value because customers are saying, we're not going to shop here. You know, I think that we're really tolerant in this country. We really are. And in fact, I would say that a lot of us have been conditioned to be tolerant, even to a fault, you know. And so I think people can stand for a lot of things. They say, okay, we can understand that, we'll accept this. But this, even people, and what we are hearing here at the American Family Association, is that even people who don't identify themselves as religious, they don't understand this policy and they find it reckless. In fact, one particular signer of the petition to boycott Target said, you know, I'm not religious, but this has nothing to do with religious conviction. This just makes no sense. A man can walk into a store and decide that he is a woman that day, and now he has access to female changing facilities and female restrooms. And so Target is feeling the pinch. But here is the deal. They are so deeply rooted in their ideology that even the pinch and even the response of the consumer has not caused them to waver. Just last week, our president met with senior management at Target and delivered 1 million signatures. 1 million signatures. Now, that's just through the American Family Association. There are other organizations all across this country where people are vowing not to shop at Target until they change this dangerous policy. Even in the face of that, you have senior management saying, we're not going to back down on this. This is where we're going to stand. And maybe we can get to this a little bit later, Steve, but you also have them justifying their stance by use of the civil rights movement, which I personally find reprehensible, and we can tackle that if you want. But no, they've not backed down. It just shows you that this is not about doing what is in the best interests of their customers. This is about Target taking a position, drawing their line in the sand, and really saying, you know what, we don't really care how you, the consumer, feels about issues. This is where we stand ideologically, and this is where we're going to continue to stand. And I want to also point out, Steve, that what you saw even last year and a few months ago, you saw Target sort of slowly rolling out this shift and making it known that when we talk about social issues, they have a position. And in fact, they are asking or forcing the American shopper to adopt that position. You saw them removing the labels from the toy section in their store. So now you don't have girls' toys or boys' toys. You just have toys. You saw them rolling out this line of gender neutral decorations for bedrooms and bedding and all of these things. And so we've seen Target sort of taking this position. But now I think the American consumer says, not only have you gone too far, but you have now effectively put us at risk. And so people are taking a stance, and I think that it's been effective, especially from the activist point.
Yeah, you know, about a week ago, I think it was the Target president went on the air. He was in an interview show, and it looked like he's not willing to back down at all. I mean, you wonder at what point, since the bottom line financially will impact a company like this, the shareholders will have to say, okay, how do we get out of this one? But it looks as if right now there's no wavering from their position, right?
Yeah, I agree. The way that we see it is that we are gearing up to take the next 1 million signatures back to Target. We're at 1.2. We hope to get to 2 million. As soon as we do, we'll revisit the issue and say, are you still going to adhere to this destructive and dangerous policy? But again, as you pointed out, Steve, this just points to an ideology that is destructive. It points to an ideology that really, we're talking about 0.3% of the population. I want your viewers to understand that we are talking about in this country the fact that there are more registered sex offenders than there are people who identify as transgender. Now, and again, what some people miss when we throw out those numbers is that we're talking about registered sex offenders. We're not talking about those who didn't get caught. We're talking about those who got caught and had to be branded as a sex offender. So now what Target is saying is that we're going to champion the cause of 0.3% of the population over and above the majority of Americans who say, we understand that people are suffering from gender dysmorphia. They don't know who they are. They are struggling to learn how to identify. We understand that. But we want our mothers, we want our daughters to be safe when they are in the most vulnerable places they will be publicly, a restroom or a changing facility. You know, I'll be honest with you. I don't know what it would take financially for Target to budge on this. And I've got to tell you, I don't think that this is about money. This is about an ideology. This is about a position socially. So when you look at it from that perspective, the dollars can keep falling. The loss can keep rising, and they are not going to budge on that position because they are trying to force the American people to go to a place and to accept something that they outright reject.
Okay, well, that was kind of leading up to what I was wondering is what your thoughts were on how far it would go down. I'm wondering, though, if this hasn't perhaps given a shock to other major corporations who may actually feel the same way Target does, but at this point they don't want to make a stance because of the backlash. Do you suppose that's been happening? But we have heard some major corporations say we're there with Target and staying with them. Do you think some are being quiet for the moment because they don't want to have a financial downfall?
Yes, I do, which is why I think it's so important for Americans to keep taking action and to encourage their friends and their loved ones to sign this petition. I do believe that when the American public stands up and says, you know what, we've really had enough of this. We've been pushed around for far too long, especially if you are a Christian, you know that your views have not been welcomed into the public square. And now the places that you shop, you are funding these corporations. They don't even value you there. It's so important for Americans to stand up, because I do believe that other corporations are taking note. I think that they are weighing the risks, and that's something that would not have happened had not 1.2 million Americans stood up and said, you know what? Enough of this. We're tired of this. We're tired of being pushed around. We're tired of saying that our safety concerns are hearing that our safety concerns don't matter. So while you're right, there are still companies like your PayPals and et cetera that are, you know, kind of drawing their lines in the sand. There are still companies that are watching and saying, you know what? Maybe this is not the direction that we should head in. I can tell you specifically that the Home Depot had a closed-door meeting that I'm aware of, where they discussed whether or not they needed to change their policy, and decided, after looking at what was happening to Target, you know what? We better leave things the way they are right now. Essentially, what Target did by promoting this dangerous policy is they created a problem that wasn't there before.
Interesting. Well, you know what I want to ask you also, since that started, of course, we heard Attorney General Loretta Lynch come out with the Obama administration policy that now is heading into all of our schools. We've got roughly a 12-page document from the Oregon Department of Education that also kind of outlines that. Let me just ask you if, and we'll get into this a little bit more later, but were you surprised at the stance she took, or was this in line with everything you've seen already with that department?
It was completely in line. It was completely in line with everything that we have seen coming out of this administration as a whole, which has been, among other things, to commandeer the civil rights movement, to attach sexual deviance to the color of one's skin, which is highly offensive. We can get more into the weeds of that if you would like. But no, I wasn't surprised at all. And the lack of surprise doesn't numb the outrage. Even though you expect this administration to continue to make gains and to make grabs for sexual deviancy in this country, it still has a sting, and it is still incredibly offensive. I mean, let's just be honest here. We like to do real talk, and what I do. And you see this black woman standing there saying that a person choosing their identity is the same thing as the immutable character trait of being black in this country. We are in trouble. And where are the people who stand up and say this is not the same thing? And in fact, what the Department of Justice relied on, and looking at the Civil Rights Act of 1964, what they relied on was expressly forbidden discriminating against someone based on their sex. Now, how hypocritical is it to fall back on that when the transgender community is expressly moving away from that? In fact, that's the crux of the argument of the transgender community, that our biology is wrong. Our sex is not such that it is. We are who we choose to identify as. Well, here you have the Obama administration and the Department of Justice saying, no, you're being discriminated against based on your sex. Now, legitimately, that's not true. We're talking about a choice that a person makes. And one of the descriptions when we talk about the transgender community is gender fluid. And people don't talk about that a whole lot. What exactly does that mean? Well, that means that you can be a woman today and a man tomorrow. That means that whatever you decide on that day, that's who you are. I have not for once in my life ever ceased to be a black woman. This should be so outrageous. But one of the things that I want to point out is that when we talk about the Civil Rights Act of 1964, in order to understand it, we would have to understand a history of suffering in this country. And it can be uncomfortable to talk about, Steve. I'm well aware of that. But we've got to talk about the Civil Rights Act of 1866 and why that was necessary before we get to 1964. And I think when you do that, you can see how ludicrous, how offensive, and how egregious it is to compare the color of someone's skin and the injustices that resulted from that to a person's gender preference, meaning today I've decided I'm a man and that's who I identify as.
All right, Meeke, I've got my knife out. We're going to go through the weeds because I think it's important to talk about some of these things. So my machete is ready to go, and we'll do that. We're going to take a break for just a couple minutes, and we're going to be back to talk about this because what's happening, we're not seeing an end to it. In fact, it's snowballing. Meeke Addison is director of the American Family Association's Urban Family Talk. She's with us. We'll be talking to her more about this in just a couple minutes right here on Focus Today.
I'm Paulina Leiser, producer of Focus Today. Thank you for watching this video, and make sure to check our other videos at theDove.us.
Welcome back to Focus Today. Steve Johnson here with you, along with Meeke Addison. She's the director of the American Family Association's Urban Family Talk, and we have her on to discuss a lot of the issues of the day. Today we're talking about what we're seeing happening with the Attorney General's department, more pointedly the Obama administration, as well as what's happening in corporate America when it comes to the whole issue of sex and transgenderism and all the rest. Meeke, we kind of left off a little bit with what we were seeing with the Attorney General's office. Let me put this in perspective. You know, it wasn't that many years ago when President Obama wasn't even sure, at least he stated publicly, whether gay marriages were legal. You know, at least he publicly said, well, I'm for heterosexual marriages. And I mean, this seems like centuries ago now that he made that comment. And now we are at the point where his administration is forcing school districts to include transgender restrooms. I mean, I can't believe that anyone would have had such a change overnight. I mean, this seems to be an agenda-driven concept going on. Do you think that's what's motivating behind the scenes here? Something is going on here that is more than just random actions that are coming together.
What an astute observation you have made, Steve. This is not some overnight progression. This is not some epiphany that happened for President Obama. What we are witnessing here, and you know, harsh language it may be, but what we are witnessing is sort of the unveiling of all of the lies that we've been fed over 2 terms. And so what you have to do in order to understand where President Obama is today is you'd have to go back to potential Senator Obama, where he said that he wholeheartedly supported same-sex marriage and he would vote against any initiatives that would block that. That was in 1995, I believe. He filled out a questionnaire by a homosexual-friendly paper where he was asked his positions as a potential Chicago senator, and that was his position. All of that was veiled so that President Obama would be appealing and palatable primarily to black constituents. I mean, overwhelmingly, black people in this country are religious and overwhelmingly, historically, have been adherents to the Word of God. And so President Obama found himself, as he was, you know, trying to position himself to be president, needing to cater to that audience. Now, here's something else that's interesting. About a year and a half, 2 years ago now, David Axelrod, who chief of staff, you know, for President Obama, said in his writing about the president that one of the things that his team, President Obama's team, did was shape a position for him that would be palatable for the black community. So that meant that he would have to reject his own conviction, President Obama's conviction, that homosexual marriage and homosexuality and the LGBT agenda would be top of his list. President Obama himself said that he wasn't very good at I cannot and will not use the term that he used, but basically he's not good at doublespeak. He would rather just come out and say where he stands, but he realized that there was much at stake, and so he had to keep that a secret. So what we're seeing here, the point that I'm making is what we're seeing here is not some sort of evolution of the president, excuse the expression. What we're seeing here is exactly who President Obama has always been. And now, as we're in the final months of his presidency, we are seeing him pull out all of the stops. We've got all of the plates spinning as he is radically trying to change this country. And he is doing that by any means necessary. So what we're witnessing here, and the Department of Justice and his entire administration, is sort of an ideology that has always been present, but dormant, waiting for an opportune time. So when the president said he evolved on, gay marriage in this country, there was no such evolution. It was just now politically more expedient to shift because he was under immense pressure from LGBT activists. So now what we see is even his administration creating a problem where there is not a problem. How many accounts do we have of students saying that they have felt discriminated against in school because they didn't have access to a bathroom or a locker room that they chose to use? I mean, let's think about what's going on here. We have the president administration damaging for their ideology to push their agenda.
Okay, we're having a little bit of
elementary
problem.
School.
Oh, go ahead.
And now,
go ahead, Meeke. We just had a little bit of a problem with your video there. Go ahead and back up just a little bit with what you were saying.
Well, if you think about what's happening in this country, what we're really discussing, pushing something that is emotionally destructive, mentally scarring for kids to be forced. You think about what it was like to be in gym class, Steve, and now you're saying, you're unsure, you've got to change into your gym clothes, so, and all of these things. And now a person who was a boy last year, and according to the Department of Justice, right, and the Department of Education, all his parents have got to do is walk in and say he's a girl this year. And that means he has access to your locker room. And here's the kicker, for me, just something that's so difficult to wrap my brain around. If the students who are adhering to what their biological sex is, right, if those students feel uncomfortable, they will have to use separate accommodations. I mean, think about how ludicrous that is. So the girl who's 14, who's already insecure, who already has body image issues, is now subjected to a boy who, because his parents said this year he wants to be a girl, now he gets to go into the locker room while she's changing her clothes. We are destroying our kids in this country, and people have got to stand up and speak out against it.
All right, Meeke, we have just a few minutes left. Let me summarize briefly and ask you a question. We've got the Department of Education now saying the schools have to implement these supposed fairness situations for these people. By the way, parents don't even have to be told. In fact, it's probably a violation if parents are told that their child is now deciding to change in their mind their gender. So parents are out of the loop. It's all the schools now determining what should happen at that point. What do you see happening down the line now that we have some states that are backing, that are opposed to it all, and they're joining together to say, you know what, this is not right, we're going to join with North Carolina? Is this going to be a Supreme Court situation here, do you think? And in the meantime, what happens?
I would imagine that it would be. And in the meantime, parents need to wake up. In the meantime, parents need to realize that just because you drop your kid off at a place at 7:30 and pick them up at 3:15, it doesn't mean that you cease to be a parent. You have an incredible responsibility. If you are a believer chiefly, you have an incredible responsibility to disciple your child and to train them in righteousness. So this is a clarion call for parents to not shirk the responsibility that they have been given. And this is an eye-opener. So many people have said, we have got to explore homeschooling. You've got to look at what your options are to protect your child, because it's obvious that the federal government, the Department of Education, and even some schools at the local level are not going to do that for you.
Do you think charter schools will also be impacted by this? I'm not sure how far these rules are going down. If they get government funds, I suppose they would be, right?
And that would be where the effect is felt the greatest. Receiving government funds is where you're going to feel the pinch here. I think that historically, the way that charter schools have positioned themselves is they have kind of insulated themselves from the government overreach. And so that's good. I don't know what that looks like as far as federal dollars are concerned. But I will say this, our private schools and our homeschooling options are those that need to be explored, because parents need to not abdicate their roles as the chief teachers and the chief leaders of their kids. And that's what we've seen historically, and it's left the door wide open for policies just like this.
So we could very well see an increase in private schools, I suppose, right? And
I would imagine that and homeschooling.
Wow, pretty amazing. Well, like I said, it's just about every week there's some new level going on here, and I know you guys are keeping up to date with that. Where can they go to get more information from what you're noticing?
I would invite concerned citizens to go to afa.net/Target if you've not already taken the pledge to boycott Target. Not only do I want you to sign that petition, but I want you to boycott Target. Don't let your dollars go there. Send a clear message to Target that you do not support these destructive and dangerous policies. All of that information is available at afa.net.
Thank you. Meeke Addison, Director of the American Family Association's Urban Family Talk. Thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Steve. My pleasure.
And thank you all for joining us here on Focus Today.